Hello, and welcome back to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and today I'm honored to welcome Dr. Monique Ruberu to the podcast. Dr. Ruberu is a pro life OB-GYN, and on today's episode, she shares some of the physical and ethical issues with in vitro fertilization, the connection between IVF and birth control. She also shares some of the fertility red flags that women should know but often aren't told, as well as what OB-GYNs are actually taught in medical school about fertility, which was fascinating to me, what they do know and as well as what they don't know. Finally, Dr. Ribeiro shares whether or not she hopes that treatments like NAPRO technology will become the default treatment for fertility in the medical field. It's a great episode. I really hope that you enjoy it. I learned so much from Dr. Ribeiro, and I hope that you do as well. I will note that we did experience Wi-Fi issues while filming the episode, which is unfortunate, so the video lags a little bit, but the audio is perfectly fine all the way through the episode, which is the most important part for a podcast anyway. If you're listening on Spotify or any of our audio platforms, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like this video and share it with someone that you think would be interested in the topic. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Ruberu to Living a Culture of Life. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Ruberu.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Thank you for coming on. I'm very excited for our conversation today to be able to talk about IVF from a medical perspective and talk about some of the issues with it that way. Before we dive into the content for our episode, could you just share with our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So, my name is Dr. Monique Ruberu. I am a pro life OB-GYN. I'm located kind of north of Philadelphia in the Philadelphia area. And I was trained as a typical gynecologist, but after practicing for many years in the typical style, I had a radical reversion in my faith. And I realized that I really wasn't comfortable writing hormonal contraceptives anymore. And I was super, super blessed to be introduced to NAPR technology. And NAPR technology is a way that you can address every GYN issue without the use of contraceptives and address infertility without the use of IVF. So it's truly root cause medicine, and it kind of opened the doors for me as I was trained like a typical gynecologist, and the main tools that we were taught to use were hormonal contraceptives. So it taught me how to
Mhm.
practice in such a way where we did true investigation to understand what the hormonal issues were for a patient and then actually address those issues to help them heal, which really should be done for everybody. But unfortunately, that's not how we're trained. So that kind of ultimately led to me owning my own practice after a lot of just very interesting twists and turns. And now I own my own practice. It's called Natural Women's Health. We actually developed an app for people all over the world to use so that they can figure out if they have normal cycles or abnormal cycles. We have a ton of free material on that app, little videos and blogs and whatnot. And in our office, we do primarily GYN care. So, all of the typical visits, abnormal bleeding, PMS symptoms, fibroids, endometriosis, painful periods, you name it. And we do just normal well woman care. We also do a ton of infertility care. So, it's just an absolute joy. My other big hat is I'm super active in the pro life community. So, I help to organize 40 Days for Life outreaches. I have kind of a co organizer in Philadelphia. And we also, participate a lot in like pro life speaking and speaking on stage about root cause medicine. So, yeah, I love doing this.
No, that's amazing. And it's so important to have OB-GYN voices in the pro-life sphere to be able to talk about how to actually affirm women's health, because that's obviously what the other side uses a lot is, oh, you're anti-women's health. So to be able to have medical professionals in that position to say, no, this is actually how you support women's health is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really beautiful.
Well, obviously, today we're going to be talking about in vitro fertilization or IVF. And this has become a very big topic, I feel like, in the past year and a half or so, ever since Alabama's Supreme Court stated that IVF embryos were children. It kind of sparked this nationwide discussion about IVF. And I think a lot of people who were informed in the pro-life movement knew some of the issues with IVF, but it's been really good to see this come onto like the national stage and have a great conversation about it. And today I wanted to talk about some of the issues with IVF from a medical perspective. So, could you just talk a little bit about what IVF looks like for the woman and how it hurts her hormones?
Absolutely. So I think a huge issue with IVF is that most people who choose IVF truly don't understand exactly what is happening. And, before even talking about how it impacts her hormones, just because of the medications that she's using and the hyperstimulation of her ovaries and all of those things, I think it's really important just to understand the basics of what is happening in IVF, right? So, when a
Mhm.
couple signs up for IVF, the first thing is the husband is asked to produce semen samples. So, he's given pornography typically, sent to another room, asked to masturbate, and they get a sample from him, which I think is, in so many ways wrong. And then the woman is actually given medications to try and increase the number of eggs that are available for removal. Then they stick a needle in and they extract these eggs. They do an egg retrieval. Then they take the eggs and they put them in petri dishes with the sperm and they try and create as many embryos as possible. Now, personally, I believe, and many other people believe, and all embryology textbooks believe, that life begins at conception. So, the minute that that egg and sperm come together and create an embryo, that is the beginning of life. And when you are looking at all of these embryos and then you go on to grade them as to their quality, and you say, okay, this one is of better grade than that one. So we can start to discard the ones that are of poorer quality. What people don't realize is that they are putting all of this time and effort and money into achieving a pregnancy, but they're already losing children right then and there. And so, say they have maybe 6 embryos that they deem to be good quality. So then they can't place all 6 in that mom at that time. So the most that they can place in that mother at that time is 1 or 2 embryos. And that's what's considered the fresh cycle. That's like their best chance for pregnancy in that one particular cycle. Then the remaining 4, say, need to be kept. So they need to go into freezing. And so when they freeze these embryos, they are then paying monthly charges to keep those babies frozen or those embryos frozen. And then they will come back and they will have to rethaw them and place them in the next round and the next round and the next round. But in that initial round itself, say those 2 embryos take off like gangbusters. And now they both split into twins. And now you have 4 little embryos there. And then they grow, and you have 4 babies, 4 fetuses with 4 heartbeats. The next thing that that physician is going to tell that mother is, this is too dangerous. Now you have a very high risk pregnancy. And what we need to do is reduce. And reduce is a very
Mhm.
pretty word for abort. So they will take a needle and they will inject into that living embryo's heart, not embryo, that living fetus's heart, and they will eliminate that baby. They will kill it, and then it will melt away over time. So once again, these parents who are paying so much money in order to achieve one healthy pregnancy are now having to abort their children possibly in order to get this one healthy pregnancy. And I think most parents don't even realize that that's even a possibility, that they could even be in that situation. And for one
Yeah.
round of IVF, it costs thousands and thousands of dollars versus doing something with neighbor technology or looking for root cause medicine. It's so much different. It's crazy. But
Mhm.
hormonally, because these women oftentimes are being given all of these medications in order to hyperstimulate their ovaries, in order to get the maximal bang for their buck, that is really causing an
Mhm.
increased risk for them in so many ways. And it's not normal to have that sort of hyperstimulation of your ovaries. So it can lead to definite hormonal issues down the road, increased risks of illness down the road having to do with the ovaries. And so I believe that it is really
Mhm.
not worth it.
It also, from my understanding, there's, like, a whole process leading up to the point of egg retrieval as well, where they need to get a number of shots and all of that. Is that correct?
So there is definitely, stimulations that are done through the use of hormonal injections. I have not,
Mhm.
I've obviously never gone through it myself, and I have not, laid out all of the specifics as to how many medications they need to take, but there's a lot. The
Mhm.
medications alone cost
Yeah.
these patients so much money.
No, I've seen videos of women online talking about the, like, lead up to egg retrieval and all of the shots, and it sounds I don't like getting shots, so just from that perspective alone, it sounds absolutely horrible, much less, we had an interview with one woman who went through IVF and was talking about how the pain from, ovulating on the table under these drugs was, like, worse than labor. So, it
Oh,
sounds
wow.
like an incredibly brutal process on the woman.
Yeah, it's definitely not a gentle process.
If I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but it also doesn't actually deal with any of the underlying issues that the woman might have for fertility reasons as well, if I'm correct. So if there's any reason that she can conceive but can't carry a child to term and is having miscarriages, it's not necessarily gonna help with that process. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. So all that IVF does is it creates these embryos and then it puts the embryo back in the uterus. But if the uterus is inhospitable because of an infection or because of lack of progesterone or whatever reason, then they're still dealing with that same uterine lining and that same issue. So yeah, it doesn't always make sense at all.
What are some common reasons that women seek IVF? What are some common fertility things that they may be dealing with that lead them to go that route?
So typical gynecologists will shuttle their patients towards IVF the moment that they hit, anywhere from 6 months to a year with difficulty conceiving a pregnancy on their own, or if they have recurrent miscarriages. And the reason they send them to these IVF doctors is they honestly don't know who else to send them to. They don't realize that there are all these other people that are doing root cause medicine and could actually find the underlying issues. So the majority of the women who walk down the pathway for IVF have been given a diagnosis of unexplained infertility. And personally, I think that that is a complete lie. I don't believe that there is anything as unexplained infertility. There's always a reason. The majority of the women that I have encountered have multiple reasons. And so when I talk to the women who are coming to me after failed IVF, they're coming to me and they're saying, "Oh, I have unexplained infertility and nobody can figure out why." When I have a conversation with them, within the first 5 minutes, I can probably tell them at least 2 or 3 things that are likely going on, which are causing them to have difficulty with their fertility. So, the majority of the women that I see will have irregular cycles, so they likely have problems with ovulation. They may have an underlying PCOS or thyroid dysfunction. They may have vitamin deficiencies. They may have an infection on the inner lining of their uterus. They may have fibroids or endometriosis. And that's just on the woman's side. One of the biggest things is a lack of progesterone because of problems with ovulation. So, patients with PCOS, patients with irregular cycles, patients with PMS symptoms. Those are all like signs and symptoms having to do with that lower levels of progesterone. People who have tail and brown bleeding at the end of their periods, they oftentimes have lower levels of progesterone or an underlying infection. And when you start looking at the male side of things, like the male workup for infertility is just really completely ridiculous because when IVF doctors look at semen analysis, they're looking at it in terms of IVF. So if that man has very low sperm count and very low morphology and very low motility, where they definitely could not or would be much less likely to be able to conceive on their own, they'll still be told that their semen analysis is normal because according to IVF standards, they only need a few, you know, semen that are a few sperm that are moving properly and have just one head instead of two and one tail instead of two. So men with like a 7% normal shape and size of their sperm will be told that that's completely fine. And so they never go further to do any other testing. They never have, a full thyroid panel for these men, insulin resistance testing for these men. They don't even do a basic complete metabolic panel to look at their liver function. Like, there is nothing done for these men. They get the semen analysis, they're told that they're fine, and then they're kicked to the curb. And that's basically how it goes.
Why do you think that OB-GYNs aren't necessarily trained to understand or look for causes of fertility issues in women? Like what some of the root causes are? Why do they go immediately to birth control or to IVF?
So I think the issue is birth control, the medical system in general is so led by the pharmaceutical industry, right? This like goes back generations because the pharmaceutical industry very early on in the game, they were the ones that were helping the doctors, providing them with all of this research and information and free samples and everything else. So the medical culture has become very used to accepting information from them. And they have become very used to like just going along with there's a real fear mongering where if you step outside of the box, you are going to be sued. And that is the one thing, especially as an OB-GYN, there is this intense fear of being sued. And so when you're going through medical school and residency, they'll tell you, like, if you do something different, nobody will defend you if you make a mistake or if somebody gets hurt. So don't ever step outside of the box. And the box is the standard of care is if you have any abnormalities with your bleeding, with your pain, with your periods, with your mood, the standard of care is treat with hormonal contraceptives. And so the people going through training have not learned anything else. There are so many beautiful treatments that you can use. And people with postpartum depression, you can give them progesterone, and within 24 hours, their symptoms are resolved. People with PMS symptoms, you can do the hormonal testing and see if they have excessive amounts of estrogen or progesterone and address that, and their symptoms will resolve. Like, you don't have to suppress the cycles. You can actually work with your cycles and support your cycles. And we were never taught how to properly investigate a thyroid. All of the tests exist, but like we look at those tests as physicians who are trained and we don't know what to do with them or how to interpret them or why they even exist. Because all we're ever
Mhm.
told is, oh, check a TSH and a free T4, and that's all you should ever do. So there's so much misinformation. It's insane.
How much do medical students learn about women's cycles in general of just the different stages and what's normal? Do they learn anything about that or do you just learn part of it, but you're told if it's abnormal, use birth control?
So what they're taught is what a normal cycle looks like, right? So they're taught that, in the normal cycle, you'll have this rise and fall in estrogen, and then that will trigger ovulation and it trigger the LH surge and trigger ovulation. And then after ovulation, you will have a rise and fall in the estrogen again and a rise and fall in the progesterone. So that basic amount of information everybody is taught. Where it all goes downhill is they're never taught how to properly evaluate a woman's cycle. So, what they're taught is okay, if you want to look at hormones, you should check a day 21 estrogen and progesterone. But they're not taught that although this is the basic pattern of how the hormones should go, not everybody will ovulate on day 14. And that if you check a day 21 on a person who's only ovulating on day 22, that's obviously going to look very different than somebody who has ovulated on day 14 or day 8. So anytime you evaluate hormones, you have to do it based on the actual point of ovulation. So if you can identify when somebody has ovulated and what their peak day is, their highest level of estrogen, then you can evaluate what is a normal peak +3 or peak +5 or peak +7 or peak +9 or peak +11. Those values are all well known, but they're not accepted in the traditional allopathic GYN world because they're not taught to people. So it's kind of crazy because you'll have physicians then saying, there's no point checking estrogen and progesterone levels because they fluctuate all through the month and you never know what normal is. And it's like, no, you can know if you track your cycles and you know where you're ovulating, then it's very easy to know what normal is. And it's very easy to understand when the estrogen is too high or the progesterone is too low. But it's just not what we're taught. So,
No, that's really fascinating. I hear about the fact that OB-GYNs aren't necessarily taught this, but it's interesting to talk to someone who went through medical school and actually had that experience just to kind of have that reaffirmed. It's not some crazy thing, it's actually just this is standard for
no,
what people are learning.
it's true.
How much do you think that our just kind of default birth control culture has led to a rise in the IVF industry? Does so many women going on birth control for hormonal issues lead to an increase of women seeking IVF later in life?
Yes, absolutely. Because of this. So, if you are suppressing a problem and just covering up the symptoms for a prolonged period of time, that problem will just
Mhm.
grow and grow and grow underneath, right? It's being covered up, it's being quietened, but the minute you get off of that birth control and now you're like, "Okay, I'm ready. I want to have a baby." Now you have to start addressing the issues which have worsened over time. And so all of the women who went on the birth control because they had really painful cycles or because they had, really heavy bleeding or because they had emotional disturbances or because they were just trying to avoid pregnancy, those hormonal pills, they're not even real hormones. They're what we call artemones. They're like fake hormones that bind differently to our receptors and cause an increased level of response. And so they're not acting like typical hormones, but they're basically trying to trick the body into believing that you're already pregnant. And so it's trying to suppress ovulation. But even that doesn't always work, right? And when you
Mhm.
put these chemicals into the body, then it leads to the body starting to fight back. And oftentimes the body will start creating really large amounts of estrogen to try and overthrow this. And then when these women get off of the birth control pills, they're left with this estrogen dominance. And that estrogen in
Mm.
crazy high levels can definitely suppress progesterone production and cause all sorts of other issues as well. But I mean, when you look at birth control pills, they're actually labeled as chemicals which cause problems for people. It's the word itself is escaping me at the moment. Endocrine disruptors. Thank you. So they're actually labeled as endocrine disruptors. So if you're trying to help an endocrine system function properly, why would you use an endocrine disruptor?
Yeah. No, it's so interesting. We see this a lot in our mission field, especially in Africa, where a lot of groups have come in, they've gotten women on the pill or with implants or IUDs, various contraceptive devices. These women are on them for years. They don't realize the health risks, and then they come off them when they're trying to conceive and they're not able to. And so that's one of the reasons that we teach so much natural family planning and cycle tracking to these women, because especially in places like Africa, there's a huge social stigma against infertility. And so it's like completely life-changing to these women to like realize their health, get their hormones balanced, be able to conceive, and then also just be able to like enter back into society. So it's so important for women to
Absolutely.
know, and it's so crazy that women aren't taught this.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, every woman across the globe should have a basic understanding of how to track her cycles, how to interpret what the cycles mean. And that's really the reason why we made this app,
Mhm.
the NWH Cycle app. And that's why we put it out there so it's free to use for absolutely anyone because every like the majority of the women coming into my office, when I would ask them the same questions that I have on the app, they would come in believing
Mhm.
that their cycles were completely normal. But when I asked them these basic questions, I would very quickly understand that either they had very heavy bleeding or they had very irregular cycles or they were having mucus throughout their cycle. And those things are never flagged because the typical gynecologist will just ask them, "Are your cycles normal?" And that's the end of the conversation. And like everybody has been taught to believe that pain with cycles is normal, that PMS is normal, that if your mom had heavy bleeding, it's normal for you to have heavy bleeding. Like all of these things are completely false. And nobody is educating women on the fact that brown bleeding is not normal and you shouldn't have pain with your cycle and you shouldn't be filling a regular pad in 1 to 3 hours or a regular tampon in 1 to 3 hours. That should never be happening. Or a super in 4 to 7 hours. It shouldn't be happening.
So for audience members that are listening that might be wondering now if their cycles are normal, things to look out for are how quickly you're filling your pad, whether or not you have PMS symptoms, what would like a normal cycle length look like, both for like the actual being on the period, how many days that should be, and just the full cycle? What are some like what's the
Sure.
like healthy time frame?
Yeah. So a normal bleeding time would be around 5 to 6 days max. If you're touching 7 days, and that doesn't mean like 5 to 6 days of heavy bleeding. That's like including any spotting, everything. If you're touching 7 days, 8 days, 9 days, 10 days, there's an issue. If you're only bleeding for like 3 days or 4 days, then there may be an issue as well, right? Um, the cycle length, so that's from the first day of your period to the first day of your next period. Completely normal is 27 to 29 days. And it's so confusing for patients because every other gynecologist that is typically trained will say something crazy like, oh, normal cycles are anywhere between 24 to 36 days. That's not normal. If you have a cycle length that's less than 27 days, I would put money on the fact that you have low progesterone. If you have a cycle length that is more than 29 days, I would put money on the fact that you have either PCOS or thyroid dysfunction. Like it happens so frequently and it's so common that and it's never looked for.
That's fascinating. I had always heard that, like, early 30s, like 32, 33 days was normal. So,
No.
that's like, I thought it was a broader range than that. Interesting.
Yeah. When you look at it, it's so beautiful because, like, when I start to do the labs for patients, they feel so validated because they've known something was a little bit off. Like, but everywhere they look, they're being told, oh, no, this is completely normal. This is completely normal. And you're fine. But yeah.
Interesting. No, it's so important for people to know also what those red flags are. So, thank you for the little caveat into that. I always love learning about it, and it's helpful to learn what, like, is medically healthy versus what's something that you might wanna get checked out. So, going back to IVF, are there any potential health issues for children who are conceived through IVF? Obviously, as pro-lifers, we know that having health issues doesn't, like, mean that someone doesn't have a good like, they're totally children of God, loved, have dignity, but it's still important for people to be able to bring up issues with IVF of if there's health issues with the children. So, is there anything that pro-lifers can bring up to argue against IVF in this area?
Yeah. So it's interesting because the studies will vary. I have absolutely read studies that show that there is a slightly increased risk of cancer and anomalies in these babies
Mhm,
because, and it makes sense because if you're taking an embryo and you're manipulating it, then that is probably
mhm,
like one of the most sensitive stages of our life. And anytime that you influence it in any way, that's going to influence the way the genes develop and everything else, right? So, definitely the freezing and the thawing and then the use of the embryos, it can definitely cause damage to those embryos and cause problems for those babies later in life. They will say on the research that they can't prove it 100% that it's related to this, or is it just that this particular couple to start off with, they have infertility. So the quality of their eggs and the quality of the sperm is not as good as the typical population. So naturally, they're at a higher risk. But yeah, I have definitely read articles where it has correlated the amount of manipulation that is done, the amount of freezing and thawing, the duration that they're kept in the freezer with poorer outcomes as they go along.
No, that definitely makes sense. It's just again, it doesn't obviously every child conceived through IVF still has dignity, but it's I think helpful to kind of know different facts about IVF and some of the issues with it so that arguing against it being a normalized practice.
And I think also, I mean, if you look at okay, so this is my baby wall for NAFR technology, right? So these are some of the
Mhm.
miracle babies that have come from us just doing what we do every day in the office, right? If you'll notice on
Yeah.
this entire wall, I have one set of twins. And I think the entire duration of time that I've been working as a NAFRO doc, we have had two sets of twins out of my office, right? So anytime that you have
Yeah.
multiples in the office, you're automatically having a much more high risk pregnancy. So it increases the mom's risk
Mm.
for preeclampsia and thyroid dysfunction and high blood pressure in the midst of the pregnancy and preterm deliveries. And all of those things can absolutely impact the child. So, if the baby can't
Mm.
stay in the uterus for as long of a time as they typically would in a singleton pregnancy, they're not going to have that same level of protection, that same amount of time to mature their lungs and everything else. And so it can definitely lead to problems for those babies in development and everything else. Not that those babies can't recover and do great. I mean, we've seen so many miraculous creamy babies, and that's why we're always, regardless, we're always defending life. um but why put a baby through that if it doesn't have to? The singleton pregnancies are always the safest pregnancies, and any physician would tell you that.
Are there any common mistakes that you find that pro-lifers make when arguing against IVF? For instance, I'm not like if they hear some medical reason, something about IVF that doesn't actually align medically with the correct argument, like, I guess I guess from my perspective, it seems like sometimes you hear an argument against something like IVF and you just latch onto it and you're like, "Yes, this is a great argument," and it might not actually be true from, like, the medical perspective. So is there anything that you've ever heard that pro-lifers say that maybe they shouldn't be saying?
I think oftentimes the issue is most pro-lifers don't really know how IVF is done, and they don't know the facts and figures about how much it really costs, or what the ultimate outcome is for the moms or the babies, or how many of these embryos are oftentimes just thawed and thrown away. So, how much life is lost just with
Mhm,
the frozen embryos as well. Um,
mhm,
I think the place that pro lifers typically fall down is more along the lines of just out of passion and love and desiring to save a baby, they may become angry and they may say things that aren't kind or aren't compassionate. But I haven't, typically, when people don't know a ton about IVF, they're more likely to just not say anything because they're afraid.
mhm.
They tend to be afraid to say anything unless they feel well versed in it. But what are the things that you've heard people say that
Less about IVF actually, and usually more about things like birth control, where people will clap back and say, "Oh, that's actually not true. Studies disprove this." And it just occurred to me that I don't know that much about IVF. I read things about it and I'm like, "Oh, that sounds reasonable." let me repeat that. And so just kind of asking you as in your capacity of knowing about the medical field, if there's ever kind of common pitfalls that people fall into. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad that there aren't.
Not that I know of. I mean, it's typically yeah, it's typically people avoiding the conversation because they're like, "I don't know enough about this. I don't wanna talk about it." The thing is this, like, even with contraception, those of us who are well versed in why contraception is bad, oftentimes the people who are promoting contraception, they just won't accept the facts. So, like, I can talk until I'm blue in the face and tell them everything that I'm telling you, and I can show them charts and everything else, but their response will be like, "Yeah, no, that's not true," without any real plausible explanation as to why it's not true. So or they'll say things like, "Oh, that you're just confabulating, you're just blowing things out of proportion," or whatever, but yeah. Oftentimes when you're taught something and you have been a part of it and you have been prescribing it for a really long time, you really feel like you have to defend it. And it's the same with abortion, it's the same with IVF. If you've participated in it, or if you have somebody that you love who has participated in it and they have a child, then you suddenly feel like you have to support IVF because if it isn't for IVF, then your grandchild or your niece or your nephew would not be here and they're such a beautiful person. And I think the issue is it's not that that person is not a beautiful person. Every child is a gift from God, and whether their beginnings happened with IVF, God still allowed that child to come to be, right? And that child is still, beautiful and worthwhile and everything else should be protected 100%. The thing is that it doesn't make IVF right just because that child was born
Mhm.
and that child is beautiful.
No, that's so true. So when pro-lifers are pushing back against IVF being the default fertility treatment, what are some things that they can offer in its place to help kind of spread awareness, and discuss fertility treatments that respect women's health and also don't have any ethical issues?
I think it honestly starts with the understanding of the cycle, right? So, just like you
Mhm.
said, IVF very much has its roots in hormonal contraceptives. So, as they're encountering people who are saying, "Oh gosh, I have to be on contraceptives," or "She has to be on contraceptives," or "We need to get this kid on the pill," or whatever, saying instead, "Hey, have you heard of this app, NWH Cycle? Do you maybe you should try this out and see if you can learn more about your cycle. And it's super easy to use. You don't need to, have any special training to use it. It's free." And then having more people start to understand what their cycle actually means would be super helpful. Now, the problem is once they realize that there's an abnormality, they have to follow up with the right kind of doctor because if they realize they have an
Mhm.
abnormality and they go to a typical gynecologist, the response is going to be, "Yeah, sure, you have heavy bleeding. Oh, yeah, we should put you on the pill." Versus if they go to somebody who understands root cause medicine and is either somebody who participates in NAPR technology or integrative medicine, then they will work with somebody who will help them to actually properly evaluate those hormones and supplement back at the correct time to help them have a more regular cycle, help them with their diet, evaluate their gut. All of those things make such a huge difference. Look at their thyroid.
No, that's really helpful to know that all those tools exist. What, in like your opinion, is the strongest argument that pro-lifers have against IVF?
That it actually ends more life than even the typical abortion pill or, surgical abortions.
Do you have any hope for obviously, we have President Trump trying to expand access to fertility treatments, including IVF, which is concerning. Do you have any hope for the future that NAPRO technology will become more common, more people will be aware of it, and IVF will hopefully go into the footnotes of history?
So, I think society is definitely changing. I think if you look anywhere on the internet, people are trying to eat healthier. They're trying to, shop at Whole Foods, eat organic. They're all up in arms about, fertilizers and plastics and microplastics and all of these things. So I think there's a definite movement towards women being more interested in learning how to chart their cycles. The Aura Ring, all of these biohacking mechanisms to track your heart rate, to track your temperatures, to track all of these different aspects are definitely super, super popular right about now. And so there's tons of hope. And especially because the fertility treatments that are associated with NAPRO technology or root cause medicine are so much less expensive. I mean, if I wanted to
Mm.
do every single investigation in a month for a patient, it still would not add up to what a typical patient is charged for a single cycle of IVF. So that means that I could, in every cycle, do a full um, ultrasound evaluation with ultrasounds all the way through the cycle. I could do a examination of their tubes in the office with ultrasound and contrast. I could, have the husband do a semen analysis. And all of these things in accordance with their faith. So they're never having to look at God and think, oh, wow, did I betray you? Did I step away from you? Is this doing something that you wouldn't be happy with? No, it's all in alignment with their faith. At no moment in time is there anything that would ever put them or their children at risk. And it's all just investigation. So it's when you consider that the average cost of IVF begins at like the $3,000 mark and it can go up to, 10, 12,000 for a month. There are people who are, mortgaging their homes and taking out loans so that they can afford a few rounds of IVF. And it's really insane because at the end of all of that, they still don't know why they are having difficulties conceiving. And I think that's a real shame. I think that everybody deserves the opportunity to be able to fully investigate what is going on with their cycles. I think that people should be educated on how to eat properly, what they should and shouldn't be drinking, how to sleep and exercise their bodies. We live in such a stressful environment, and people really oftentimes live and die for their jobs and keeping up with the Joneses, and it's very challenging. So, there's so much that can be solved with just, slowing down and breathing and drinking water and
Mm.
not putting a lot of nonsense into your bodies.
So true. And even to expand on that, even beyond just the fertility question, a woman's hormones are so integral to her health in general that this is so important to know to be able to make sure that you're healthy in every aspect of your life, not just in the ability to achieve a pregnancy.
Yeah. The same issues that show up in your teenage years are going to follow you all through your life, right? So it starts off
Mm.
at the age of 14, you're having irregular cycles and late cycles, you're having painful periods, and then it moves into this really bad PMS and painful periods and heavier bleeding and iron deficiency and fibroids and endometriosis and infertility, and it's all interrelated. But if you stop and you start
Yeah,
to address it at
absolutely.
the beginning and you eliminate the toxins and you give your body what it needs to heal, then you have a much better shot of having normal fertility and painless periods. It's beautiful.
Yeah. No, for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show to discuss these topics, Dr. Monique. Could you share with our audience where they can find you for more information and about the app again?
Absolutely. So, my website is naturalwomenshealth.com. And I am all over the internet. So I have a YouTube channel, Dr. Monique Ruberu. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. So if you just look up Monique Ruberu, I'm sure you'll find me. Um, the app is available on Android as well as iPhone, and you can just search for NWH, like Natural Women's Health, NWH Cycle. So it's a free app. And if you want us to actually interact with you and give you feedback on your cycles, then you can always opt in for the premium and you can have more access to different content and maybe have some interaction with us and get some feedback.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, thank you for the time of coming on the show today. It's been really interesting. I love talking about these issues, so it's great to discuss them further.
Thanks for having me, Colleen. Have a wonderful day.
And to all of our audience, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions on these topics, please leave them in the comment section. And as always, keep on living the culture of life. God bless.